Well, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings. Welcome to the afternoon webinar. Um, we're going to go ahead and get started. We know people are still trickling in, but it is that time. So welcome. My name is Amy Foster Wolferman, and my colleague here, Megan Rides at the Door, and I are going to be talking with you for the next hour or so about a social emotional learning curriculum called Students, Trauma, and Resiliency, or STAR, as we like to call it. And the developer of STAR, our colleague Deborah Hollis, was not able to join us today. She would be presenting this normally, but is out sick today. So we're going to fill in and cover the webinar today. She initially developed it back in 2011 and then was able to revise it more recently in 2021. And so we are going to kind of walk you through what the STAR curriculum is, this resource, and how you might be able to use it in your programs. We are from the National Native Children's Trauma Center, and I'm going to ask our director, Dr. Megan Retzador, to move to the next slide. Thank you, Megan. So our organization, it's the National Native Children's Trauma Center, is housed within the College of Education at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana. And our current center was founded in 2007 based on some grant funding we received from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And so when we received that funding, we became a part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And that's where we operate as a Category 2 training and technical assistance site. And our primary focus is on supporting tribal children, youth, and families who've been affected by trauma and those who serve them. And so we work with a number of different agencies from juvenile justice, the schools, mental health agencies, law enforcement, medical facilities sometimes, and it's with families and community members as well. And we have worked in rural and urban settings all over the nation. And our approach to the work is very much based on a collaboration with our partners. And so we walk alongside our partners and do our best to provide the kind of support that they might want and need as it fits within their own community and cultural context. At this time, I'd like to share our university's land acknowledgement, and that is the University of Montana would like to acknowledge that we are coming to you from the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. Today, we honor the path they have always shown us in caring for this place for the generations to come. On a personal note, I live here in Missoula, Montana, where our center is housed. I come to this work after having been a teacher, a special education teacher, and also a school-based consultant helping schools implement positive behavioral interventions and support, as well as bullying prevention and suicide prevention and intervention. And now, and since our center inception, I've really been working with schools to develop more trauma resilience on multiple levels, so school-wide, in classrooms, with individual students, and then also with connection with community. So we have a lot of staff, about 15 right now, and we are all over the country. We have folks in um, Minnesota, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Arizona, of course, Montana. So we are vast and spread out. So I'd like to now pass it to our director, Dr. Megan Rides at the Door, to introduce herself.
Great, thank you, Amy. Thank you for attending this afternoon session. I'm Dr. Megan Rides at the Door. I serve as our director of our trauma center. Prior to that, my background is in mental health counseling, and prior to that, I worked at the center as a staff member. I carry a Blackfeet last name through marriage, but I'm an enrolled member of the Fort Peck Dakota and Nakota tribes in northeastern Montana, and a descendant of the absentee Shawnee tribe in Oklahoma. And I too am also joining you from Missoula, Montana. And I'll just say that, the curriculum that we are going to be talking about today is really helpful. We've been able to do some lesson plans with students once in a great while, and just be able to see the ability of students be able to learn more information and be able to utilize these skills are what's really helpful about this curriculum. Seeing it in action is really helpful. Yeah, we're excited to talk to you about it. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. Next slide, please. And then if folks do have comments or questions throughout, please, if you wouldn't mind using the chat, and if I could get help too from Megan and Antonia to monitor that if things come up, please feel free to do that. We'll also have time at the end for more questions and comments. So thank you. Want to mention our partners here. We've been really fortunate and feel honored that we've been able to partner with the Tribal Law and Policy Institute to together form the Tribal Youth Resource Center, where we primarily work to support any work integrating trauma-informed approaches and practices in tribal youth programs, also in tribal juvenile healing to wellness courts through trainings and also projects with other TLPI staff around trauma informing different assessments and different training curricula. So we've been in this partnership for about 6 years now, and the funding comes from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention programs, and we really look forward to being able to continue along with this work as long as we can. Next, please. We do want to note that the funding that does come from OJJDP, um, what we share today might not reflect the opinions, the findings, conclusions, and recommendations of the Department of Justice. Need to note that. Next slide. So we're going to start with a brief overview of what we mean by trauma and its impacts, just to create a common starting place and language around this topic. And that will link directly into the development of the STAR curriculum, and then also talk about how it can fit within a larger systems approach to trauma informing a setting. Now, if any of you did participate in our webinar last week on the Bounce Back for Classrooms curriculum, the beginning material that we're going to cover is very much the same as that. The curriculum that we dive into is different. Bounce Back for Classrooms is for the younger kids, second grade through fifth grade age, and the STAR curriculum is really for the middle and high school age students. All right, next slide. All right. So diving into our introductory material. We use the word trauma a lot. We don't know what how everyone takes meaning out of the word. So just to create some consistency across uh, all of us here today, we are drawing from a definition that comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And this is a definition that's commonly used by mental health professionals. And it is that trauma is this experience of a real or perceived threat to our life or our safety, or to the life or safety of a loved one. And this experience causes such an overwhelming sense of fear, terror, hopelessness, or helplessness. And our brains and bodies go into this automatic reaction to this threat by going into a fight, flight, freeze kind of survival mode in order to protect ourselves from this perceived danger or actual danger. And this is just an amazing survival skill that we all have as human beings. And one of the important pieces here, the first part of the definition, the experience of a real or perceived threat. And it's not the event itself that is traumatic, but it's the experience that we have of the event. And so two people may live through the same event, for example, a car accident, but experience it very differently. So if I were to experience the car wreck as a threat to my life or safety, and I'm overwhelmed with all these feelings of fear and terror, then I've experienced trauma. But if you were in the car with me in the passenger seat and you just didn't perceive that we were in danger, and you never felt those overwhelming emotions, then it was not traumatic for you. So just keeping in mind that what might be traumatic for one person might not be at all for another. We want to make sure that we're not making those assumptions based on people's life experiences. Um, and the other thing is that experiences of trauma also include that witnessing of a real or perceived threat to a loved one, which can be just as traumatic as if we experience it ourselves directly. Next slide, please. And there are a number of different types of traumas that we might experience. Some are considered acute, meaning our experience is happens one time typically in our life. There might be experiences of violent incidents, um, witnessing domestic violence or community violence, a one-time rape or other violent incident, an accident, severe weather events, sudden loss of a loved one, but all of these kinds of traumas that typically happen once in one's life. The chronic traumas are those multiple experiences of trauma. So not only experiencing a car accident, but also witnessing domestic violence, also experiencing the sudden loss of a loved one. And so it's sort of this combination of different types of traumas. And it can also mean repeated experiences of the same type of event, such as ongoing neglect or physical or sexual abuse or parental substance abuse. So kind of those ongoing chronic traumas. We also have complex trauma, and this includes chronic trauma, but with the addition that the trauma typically begins early in one's life and it causes long term impacts to typical development. And it often occurs by one's own caregiver. So that really further complicates the impact, especially in relation to how we trust and attach with others. Um, and then we also must mention historical trauma, really the wounding experience of historical events, things such as genocide that get passed from one generation to the next. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. And the last one here is secondary traumatic stress, which is the impact that working with others who are experiencing trauma can have on us. So, over time, with repeated exposure to other people's traumas, we can start to develop those symptoms of traumatic stress very similarly to those who have experienced the trauma directly. So, we really need to be mindful and working protectively against that. And all these types of traumas can be woven together. So, then in regards to historical trauma, you're probably familiar with the work of Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart. She is a Lakota psychologist, researcher, and professor on her kind of moving into her retirement phase of life now. But she first coined the term historical trauma among North American tribes. And she had looked at studies of Jewish Holocaust survivors in World War II and how several generations after the Holocaust, descendants who hadn't directly experienced the Holocaust were still showing similar symptoms to those of the survivor. So, post traumatic stress disorder or traumatic stress like symptoms. And so, she applied this concept to her own Lakota people and found something very similar based on the traumatic events that her tribe and other tribes in North America experienced. So, we all know that Indigenous people in North America have experienced just tremendous losses and traumas over the course of several hundred years, and the long list of these, genocide being one, forced relocation from homelands to reservations, forced assimilation, including the boarding school policies that removed a lot of children from their homes and subjected them to abuse, policies that prohibited tribal spiritual and cultural practices and the speaking of one's own language, and just ongoing racism and stereotyping. And these events and experiences have had long lasting impacts that we still feel today. And so Dr. Yellowhorse Braveheart defines historical trauma as the cumulative psychological wounding across generations, including our own lifespan, which emanates from massive group trauma. And so when we are working in tribal communities addressing trauma, it's important to realize that historical trauma can be a piece of the underlying context of current community wide traumas and those traumas that children and families experience still today. And there's certainly other populations that have also experienced historical trauma, but it's just important for us as service providers to educate ourselves about these histories. Next slide, please. In regards to individual impacts of trauma, we can see in a lot of different domain areas these impacts. So, physically, we might experience somatic symptoms like headaches, stomach aches, and dizziness. We might be hypervigilant and feel like we're always on guard, looking out for danger at all times. We might struggle to fall asleep at night, and we might even do whatever we can to avoid people or places or things that remind us of the trauma that we experience. Mentally, we may have intrusive thoughts about the trauma that are really difficult to control or stop, and it can make it really hard to concentrate and be present and engaged in the moment. We might also develop some unhelpful thinking patterns, kind of perceiving that the world is a dangerous place or that people are out to harm me. And we might feel at times like we're actually reliving the trauma that we experienced, and we may not really want to think or even talk about our trauma just to avoid the hard feelings that come with those memories. We may believe that the trauma we experienced was our own fault, and so we might have feelings of guilt. Some kids might think if they are physically abused by a care provider that they must be a bad kid and that they deserved it, or that if their mother is being harmed, that they should have done something to stop it. So there's some of those lingering feelings of guilt. And when we've experienced trauma, we might feel like we're in survival mode, just kind of anxiously awaiting when the next bad thing's going to happen. And we might try to escape these feelings by avoiding any kind of reminders and even checking out to the degree that we feel numb, sometimes through substance abuse. We may have very intense feelings that seem to come out of nowhere that are hard to understand what they are, and especially difficult then to be able to regulate them. And we might just suddenly feel really angry and not know why that is. And then spiritually, we might begin to question our beliefs, our religion, our creator, God. We may wonder how a higher power like this could allow these traumas to happen. We might stop attending religious gatherings or ceremonies and just feel disconnected from something that we once felt a part of. And, maybe we um, derive joy from being out in nature and feeling a part of something larger than ourselves. And then after these experiences of trauma, we don't feel this connection any longer. We start to feel more isolated. And so, um, these are some of the common symptoms of trauma. We may experience some of these or several of these, and they might fade away over time naturally. But sometimes we get stuck in these symptoms, and that's when we need to be concerned about getting help to those who might need it. And these are the kinds of symptoms that the STAR curriculum was built around. So, helping with emotion regulation, using more helpful thinking strategies, understanding what's happening to us based on our experience of trauma, and kind of regaining that sense of self control. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the curriculum. Next, please. Because STAR focuses on middle and high school aged youth, we're just going to take a moment to look at how trauma impacts some specific adolescent developmental tasks. So during adolescence, the brain is continuing to build connections and pathways that allow our young people to think more abstractly and to be able to imagine their futures and consider consequences of their behavior. So they can also more realistically assess situations and judge what's dangerous and what's safe. And they can make decisions to actually change their current behaviors in order to meet longer term goals. But adolescents who've experienced trauma may find it's difficult to even imagine or plan for any kind of future. Instead, they're really living in the moment in survival mode and really doing what feels good and safe right now without thinking about consequences. And they may have trouble accurately assessing danger. They might overestimate how dangerous the situation or activity might be, or even underestimate the danger. They might engage in aggressive or disruptive behaviors. And often that's because they've been reminded of a trauma, so they're jumping into the fight, flight, or freeze response. And they may engage in more sort of reckless or just self-destructive behaviors, drug or alcohol abuse, cutting, protected sex, and those kinds of activities. So adolescents who are reminded of their trauma or who feel like they're experiencing it might feel like there's something wrong with them, that they're somehow weak or strange or kind of going crazy. And this can lead them to feeling even more isolated and anxious and depressed um, than they already are because of the trauma. So, all of these are symptoms of trauma that the STAR curriculum works to address. Next slide, please. There are a couple of frameworks that we like to use to help us define a trauma informed system or environment, whether it be at school or other setting. And one of them is the 4 Rs that was developed by SAMHSA. What SAMHSA did was asked a group of trauma survivors, practitioners, and researchers to come together as kind of a think tank to discuss what does it take for an organization to best serve those who've been impacted by trauma. And so they came up with the concept of the 4 Rs. And the first R is everyone in the setting needs to realize the pervasiveness of trauma experienced by those that they serve, as well as kind of understanding, developing this shared understanding of what trauma is and how common it is in our kids and our youth and families, as well as ourselves and our colleagues. So really building that awareness. And then also recognizing signs and symptoms of trauma in those that they serve. So, I, just understanding behaviors through what we often call a trauma lens. Why might this be happening? And then the system responds by intentionally incorporating trauma informed practices and interventions that help sort of mitigate the effects of trauma. And then the fourth R is resisting re traumatization. So, through really taking a close look at our policies and procedures that might actually be trauma reminders and making situations worse. Sometimes timeouts or detention rooms or harsh disciplinary practices can have that kind of opposite effect that we want. And so, STAR curriculum helps us um, better recognize the signs and symptoms, and also it's a response. It's really considered a best practice that focuses on trauma informed social emotional learning and skill building. So it also fits within this larger multi tiered system of support or positive behavioral interventions and support kind of framework. It's a tier 1 or universal social emotional learning curricula, and it can be implemented with all youth in a setting. So if you're not familiar with the triangle, it comes from the public health model of prevention and intervention. And it's really just a way to organize a set of practices, curriculum, and interventions that a setting might have to help prevent and intervene with particular um, public health issues. It could be trauma, it could be bullying, it could be smoking, it could be heart disease. And so, one example I think that helps paint the picture of what a multi tiered system of support can do is around heart disease. And so, if a community wants to prevent heart disease, we might educate everybody at that tier 1 level on how exercise and good nutrition can reduce our risk for heart disease. We might promote healthy eating and exercise through various community events and activities. And these preventative efforts can be helpful for most people in our community to prevent heart disease. And by doing them, we're preventing them from needing more intense levels of heart disease intervention. But some people, even with this good best practice, might need a little extra support to prevent heart disease. They might need to also take a special medication that they can then regularly take in addition to the nutrition and the exercise that they get at the tier 1. And so this medication is available and accessible easily to those who are at higher risk. And that might be enough for those folks. So the combination of the tier 1 and 2 strategies can prevent a lot of people from needing more intensive interventions. But even with that great education, nutrition, exercise, and added medication, a few people might need more intensive individualized interventions, such as open heart surgery. So you can really apply this same logic with supporting youth impacted by trauma. So everyone can learn about the impacts of trauma and stress and how to develop healthy coping strategies. We just teach all kids at the tier 1 universal level. Some kids might need a little extra support or practice with being able to apply those skills. And so an organization may also have small groups that get together to practice these skills. And they might even have some therapeutic approaches where they're processing trauma with a mental health professional in that targeted tier 2 level group. And then a few youth might even need more intensive, individualized levels of support. Um, and that would be considered a tier 3 level or individualized treatment. So STAR was designed as a tier 1 social emotional learning curriculum as a way to teach all students basic knowledge and skills. And by doing that and following this sort of logic of an MTSS, we're going to reduce the number of students needing additional or higher level, intense level of support. Next slide, please. In addition to following the 4 Rs, a trauma informed organization incorporates several key principles. And one is that everyone in the organization develops an understanding and awareness of trauma. And this is what we call that trauma lens. So that when, for example, a student in a school setting or other youth program is experiencing a trauma reminder and they shut down and become unresponsive, we can better understand why they may be acting this way instead of assuming that they're being disrespectful or non compliant or whatever assumption that we might make. We might be able to see and sort of understand that they're acting out of fear. And we're not always going to know, but we can apply this perspective to different situations as we develop relationships with the youth that we're working to support. And then another key principle is safety. So our youth impacted by trauma are often walking around in that survival mode, feeling really fearful or worried and anxious. And so creating safe spaces where youth know what to expect in terms of routines, expectations, how adults are going to act and treat them. All of these things help our youth to feel safe so that they can let their guard down a little bit more and be more present and engaged in the activities. Another principle is empowerment. So, our youth impacted by trauma can sometimes feel like things continue to just happen to them and that they have no real control over their lives. So, we can help them build back their sense of control by giving them choices and really listening to what they say, validating what they share, letting them know that who they are and what they say and think matters, and that what they want for themselves, what they dream about for their future can actually happen. So I really want to work to empower our youth. And then lastly, here, we have taking a strength based approach. So, again, our youth impacted by trauma can sometimes feel damaged. Something's wrong with them. They may develop a lowered self esteem. So, really, it's important to highlight what it is they can do and what they want to do more so than continuously correcting the things that they may struggle with. And so, also to show that we really believe in their ability to be successful and to sort of help instill that hope in them. Next slide, please. And then thinking back to the triangle, and we bring this up because we really encourage sites to not only take on a particular curriculum that they're teaching youth discrete uh, knowledge and skills, but we also want that to be done and implemented within a setting that is more trauma informed. And thus, we're talking about how you can fit this curriculum and the teaching of it into a broader approach to a trauma informed system. So thinking back to that triangle, the bottom portion, which represents the tier 1 strategies and approaches, that's really where STAR fits in because we're teaching all youth. But there are other trauma informed strategies and approaches that are recommended that adults use with youth to help create these environments where they do feel safe and empowered and in control. And these strategies are really important for youth impacted by trauma, but they're also really good just for all kids. Um, so one of them, oh, thanks. There's a list here of bullets. Yes. So one is having very clear expectations, how, helping kids know what to expect so that they could feel more at ease. Explicitly teaching social skills, and STAR helps to fulfill this practice. providing high rates of praise and encouragement to really help focus on youth strengths and to build that self esteem, and also to help motivate kids to want to engage in more healthy behaviors that we're teaching. We want to shift to a non punitive approach to discipline, so one that is meant to teach our youth what to do instead and to build the skills to do it, as opposed to simply stopping a behavior through punishment. They want to take that educative approach. And then we want to work to understand a youth's behavior, really realizing that what we see on the surface has underlying reasons. And with our kids impacted by trauma, the behaviors are often about avoiding things that feel dangerous or seeking what feels safe. Um, we definitely want to be working as a team. So when we're struggling to understand what might be driving a youth behavior, it can really help to work as a team to problem solve. So the getting input from various perspectives and levels of expertise. And just different people have different relationships and knowledge of a youth. So bringing those people together, including family members and care providers, to add their insights and knowledge. Being consistent is really important. So wanting everybody in the environment to be utilizing these same kinds of approaches and practices. And then I think this is one of the most important, I would say, in terms of trauma healing, and that is working to intentionally create positive, nurturing relationships, because trauma typically happens within the context of relationship. So we can sort of build back that feeling or connection, or build for the first time, maybe this sense of feeling connected to another, to feeling valued by another, and to feel protected. So all of these strategies contribute to creating this safe environment. And we also, a part of that is encouraging staff to pay attention to their own emotional state and to really notice when they might be getting stressed or a bit reactionary. And so to try to maintain that calm and to model being able to regulate their emotions can be very powerful. We want to get everybody on the same page, including the drivers and administrators and um, youth support workers and teachers, whomever it might be. And so these are some examples of strategies we can use with all kids that are particularly helpful for our youth impacted by trauma. And in addition to directly teaching the youth skills in the curriculum, we want to work on creating that safe setting. And this all of these apply to when we're actually implementing the curriculum, setting up that space and time in this safe and supportive manner. Next slide, please. So STAR was designed as a social emotional learning curriculum. And the definition of social emotional learning, as defined by kind of the leaders in the field of SEL, are the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL. And they define it as the process by which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. And so we know it's really difficult to learn if we're struggling socially and emotionally. So having these skills is really foundational to being able to utilize kind of our thinking brain, because we really have a difficult time accessing it when we are kind of overrun by our emotional or survival brain. So in our previous work we did had a pilot uh, group of schools based in Washington State, and we spent some time reviewing their state standards around social emotional learning, and we compared them with the objectives of the curriculum because that was really important to them. So if we go to the next slide, you can see we found quite a lot of overlap between the different learning objectives that are covered in the STAR curriculum and the different components that have been identified in terms of social emotional learning competencies that are statewide. So implementing, they're really happy to know that utilizing this curriculum was going to help them meet some of those state standards. And that's going to, of course, look different in every state. Next slide, please. So why did we develop STAR? And I think it's probably obvious by now, but we just know that trauma is still prevalent in a lot of our student population. And there can be so many barriers to getting um, those impacted by trauma, those who are needing support, connected with mental health resources. Sometimes communities don't have very many resources like that, or maybe transportation is an issue, or simply stigma. I don't want to be seen in the mental health section of IHS. So a lot of barriers to getting kids sometimes the mental health support that they need, but they do spend a lot of time in school. And so we know that in school settings, there have been evidence based trauma focused interventions that have been really helpful. One of them is cognitive behavioral interventions for trauma in schools. It is a therapeutic intervention that's for middle high school age youth, as well as bounce back, also a therapeutic intervention. And they have both shown, as they've been conducted in school settings, to reduce traumatic stress symptoms, depression, and anxiety, right? But we have found, and that's great, but we have some barriers with that too. Sometimes it's hard to get permission to be able to have students participate in groups or youth participate in groups. And um, really, we just found that the need is so high that just running small targeted group interventions doesn't reach enough of the youth that need the support. So we created STAR, or our colleague Deborah Hollis, with some of help from us, created STAR as an attempt to develop something that all students have access to at that universal level. Next slide, please. So it was designed again for middle and high school age students or youth, and it has been facilitated as a pilot in both a high school and a middle school. It was also used in an urban Indian health center as an after school program for middle school aged youth. And it can be used in multiple types of settings. We really did have schools in mind, um, but we know that it can also be utilized in other programs that serve and support our youth. So it's made up of 8 lessons, and each of the lesson plans are about 50 minutes each. And it's based on concepts of cognitive behavioral therapy. And this has been proven to be really effective in treating childhood trauma. But STAR, it's not a clinical intervention, it's educational. So the therapeutic pieces have been taken out um, to really to decrease student risk. And so what's been maintained is supporting with healing and resiliency building by increasing knowledge and skills. So although it could be led by a school counselor or a mental health professional, it could also be led by just staff who have experience working with youth. And a mental health license is not required, and neither is a teaching certificate. And so, if possible, we do recommend that people facilitate these classes as a team of two with another facilitator, so that someone can be sort of monitoring how students are doing while the other one is teaching the concepts. Next slide. And the goals of STAR are really around reducing some of those common symptoms of trauma that we talked a little bit about already, and building coping skills to sort of increase their resilience to the trauma that they've experienced, or to future potential traumas that they may experience. And so we hope that youth feel also understood and less isolated as they start to learn about these common reactions to stress and trauma. And that is the introductory portion of our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. So this slide shows the lesson sequence. So there's 8 lessons, and you can kind of see how it builds from providing an introduction and an overview of what will be learned throughout the various lessons that are coming, providing some predictability about what people are going to be learning, and instilling hope in what that new tools can be learned. And there's a lot of things that people can do to be helpful and help people um, cope with trauma and other stressful situations. So we start with introduction, and then we go into a lot of education, a lot of basic knowledge about what trauma is, what grief is, what loss is, and coping, and how that can help them improve their well-being. We then go into feelings identification, which is really helping them be able to build their vocabulary of emotions. You know, a lot of times we can ask youth what they're feeling, and they may often not even be able to tell us, right? They say, I don't know, or have limited feeling words which to draw from, or just have difficulty even being able to talk to people about their emotions. So really helping them learn about feelings, the different intensities of feelings. Then we move into um, thoughts, and bringing their attention to how they're thinking, and, you know, begin to identify unhealthy um, thinking patterns. And that leads us to really thinking about how we challenge these unhelpful thoughts that everyone has. So we kind of universalize that everybody has unhelpful thoughts at some point or another, often in life, that they come up, but that our ability is to be able to, when they come up, be able to challenge them and be able to shift them to more helpful thinking, and really linking both feelings, thoughts, and understand how some of these feelings, negative feelings and thoughts, can really influence us to avoid situations and cause us anxiety in our lives, and really to begin to, approach these things that we've been avoiding, or approach anxiety provoking situations that we deal with, and have our ability to be able to engage in actions through this process. And so towards the end, we really think about social problem solving, and think about how our thoughts and feelings lead to different actions we might take, really trying to help them develop this executive functioning around thinking before they act, and weighing the pros and cons, and thinking about the consequences ahead of time. And so it really just having them list out the pros and cons and consequences of various actions that are all the possibilities that they could take, and really helping them see how they unfold, and helping them make the better decision for themselves in various different social situations. We try to bring real world situations to them, and have them come up with situations as well, to help it become more practice and in the moment, and bring it to their reality. And then finally, lesson 8 is really about thinking about their circle of trust, and being able to come up with who are the resources that support them, which can also help identify gaps, and be able to start thinking about how we can even increase the number of people surrounding them and resources available to them in their healing. So this is kind of the overview of what it is. Next, we'll kind of go through some of the examples of some of the components throughout all of these various lessons, to kind of give you an idea of some of the concepts that are reviewed throughout the curriculum with the students. So you can kind of see how things are brought up to them, and see some of these things that are helpful and could be helpful on this universal level to all students. So one of the important things that we talk about is the body's danger response, and really helping them understand that this is an automatic reaction, that it is serving a purpose of survival, and that we need this danger response a lot of time in order to be able to respond to threats in our life. And so we talk about how if you were to come up on a dangerous situation like a snake. And we kind of use this example because we don't want to use potentially traumatic events as examples. So we kind of use this a little bit less dangerous, kind of example, just to be able to help them understand that this concept without thinking about something very traumatic. So this is why we kind of use this. Some people feel like, oh, how come you're kind of using this, example of this situation? Or some people may feel like it's not that dangerous, or, depending upon the culture, you might have a different experience or understanding or relationship with this animal, depending upon your community and cultural background. So that will definitely play a part in whether you use this, where people use this example or not. But we talk about coming up on a dangerous situation like encountering a snake and how that might make them feel within their bodies, what might be going through their emotions, and trigger this response system to activate. And then we talk about false alarms. So if you were to be coming across, walking across a path, walking outside again, even though that threat has been gone, that when you still may feel on edge, and that the more traumas that you experience, the more likely you are to be in this state of really looking out for danger, right? Your body's alarm system is activated more often than not. And so we kind of go into explaining, how this feels in our body and how our body's reacting in these various emotions. And this helps us be able to think about, trauma reminders that can happen that are very common, and how this experience is a normal, common experience. We try to normalize these reactions, and we call them, common reactions for this purpose. And one of the greatest things about being able to go through a lot of these different reactions, I mean, Amy already went through this previously on her slide, and one of the best things about this is that kids get to learn that this isn't unique to them. In some, like, this is a common reaction to this experience that they've had, that they're not the only ones, that other people experience these kinds of things too. Of course, everybody's unique in exactly how they will be affected, but certainly there are a lot of common reactions that people have. And so there are a lot of different ways that are possibilities to be able to talk about common reactions, like putting Post-it papers around the wall with mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional, and having them label and put things in various places of the room. So kind of having them move around and be able to talk about this in an interactive way, rather than just kind of rehearsing these things with them. So there are a lot of different opportunities to bring this to them, but common reactions is a way to really help them feel like they're not alone in these experiences. Another thing that is brought in pretty early on into the lesson plans is to talk about and practice progressive muscle relaxation. So it's not just learning educationally, but it's also practicing some of the coping skills that will help promote relaxation. So we know that stress and anxiety cause muscular tension. And we all may carry tightness in our bodies at different places. And, we can think about how this might affect us and bring our awareness to our bodies. And even you could even do that just right now, just thinking about kind of bringing your attention to your body right now and thinking, feeling where it feels tense in your body. And this, progressive muscle relaxation is kind of a process of um, tensing and releasing one muscle group at a time while engaging in breathing. And this, technique really builds on, the theory that when you are physically relaxed, it can help us, psychologically feel less anxious and more relaxed as well, right? So it's just helping our bodies, because we don't want it to be in an alarm system. We want it to be calm, relaxed. And when we are calm and relaxed, then we can learn new things. We can retain new things. We can begin to learn about some of the concepts we're even learning within this curriculum. And so progressive muscle relaxation is something that we practice, but we encourage them to do outside of our time together. And so, and then we follow up with them to see if they've been practicing it, if it's been helpful for them. And yeah, just going through the journey to see how what they've thought about it and how it's been helpful for them. And there's other kinds of things like this. There's a lot of things that can promote relaxation, visual imagery, and other things that could be incorporated. Listening to a cultural song, or thinking about other things that could be brought in to be able to promote relaxation as well. So one of the things that I mentioned that we learn about is thinking about, really increasing our vocabulary of emotions and learning about the different intensities of emotions. So within angry, what, what is in within this, right? Is it furious? Is it more, irritated? Really thinking about really the different ways in which these kind of basic emotions, happy, sad, angry, and anxious, can really take on a different light, and that there are nuances among words. Even thinking about it could be helpful to even think about culturally and in the traditional languages, what are words in the traditional language to describe emotions? Are there feeling words within the traditional language that would help us describe these things more from the culture? And that could also be educational and help us, cultural revitalize this knowledge while we're at it. And as Amy said, this curricula really builds upon cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really learning about how feelings, thoughts, and actions are created, are all interconnected. And so, we use positive examples, like let's say that we, at the end of the day, before we left work today, we were all going to go on a field trip to get something, a treat, right? And it's like, oh, what kind of thoughts would we be having? And we'd brainstorm that. And then because of those thoughts, what kind of feelings did that bring up? And then what kind of actions would we take in response to these thoughts and feelings that we may have? And it's really helping them understand that, when we have negative thoughts, feelings, that we can change these things to be able to take different actions, and how that influences our behavior. And then we can use some other examples, some real world traumatic experiences, like witnessing a friend getting jumped at the basketball court, and what kind of thoughts that they may have about this. Maybe thoughts that they might get jumped, feeling scared, actions avoid, right? Avoiding the basketball court altogether, not playing basketball at all, right? There's all kinds of things that could potentially happen, and helping them link these things together. So we kind of spend a lot of time really reviewing multiple situations so that they're understanding how these things are all linked. And sometimes we have to do a little bit of extra work, sometimes, because a lot of youth sometimes have a hard time distinguishing between thoughts and feelings, because they're still new to even communicating about their feelings. And so they may say things that are really thoughts, or say things that are feelings, in place. And so we may have to do some extra work to help them be able to understand those things a little bit more. And then we help them identify that there are unhelpful thoughts, again, emphasizing that everyone has unhelpful thoughts, but that, really becoming aware of our thinking patterns, and really helping us be able to correct these things. There's a lot of different ways in which we can think that are unhelpful to us. There's so many different ways, right? Catastrophizing is exaggerating the negative consequence of a situation. All or nothing is thinking in extremes. Fortune telling is predicting a negative outcome, even without even thinking about what are the odds of that outcome even taking place. Mind reading, just assuming what other people are thinking without even communicating with them or checking in with about it. Emotional reasoning is believing something is true because it feels true, to us without facts to support it. Overgeneralization is making a broad assumption based on limited experience. Labeling to self and others and the world, often negative labels that we can attribute to things, I'm a bad person, or that's a bad kid, right? Well, are examples of negative labeling. Should haves, thinking about what should have happened, and having that continue to overshadow what did happen. Mental filtering is focusing on the negative instead of the positive aspects. Dismissing, brushing away the positive possibilities. Personalization is thinking everything people do and say is some kind of reaction to us. So these are just some examples of some of the unhelpful thoughts people can have, and it helps people understand that, oh, this is what I'm doing here. And again, just to know that when you become aware of what you're doing, then you're able to think about some of the other possibilities, and we have them question themselves. So what's most likely to be true about this? What are the facts that support this? How can I think in a more helpful way? What is the most likely possibility to happen? And certain things like that to help them start to really challenge these thoughts. And then we want them to focus on the positive. So thinking about, visualization, thinking about positive thinking, identifying what's going well, focusing on strengths, visualizing, having that positive imagery, drawing, writing, sharing, and writing, 3 positive statements about themselves. So helping them build a little bit of self-esteem in this way. And really, shifting these unhelpful thoughts to more helpful thoughts. And this is a practice that takes a lot of time, and the youth can help one another out in when we're brainstorming, we come up with a lot of different unhelpful thoughts, and then, really challenge them to change their thinking. And you could even make a game out of it, right? It's like really, really, pestering a youth about with these unhelpful thoughts and really making them challenge you in this thinking, and helping them be more imaginative and creative, and helping them develop that skill to be faster at it as well. And then, as I talked about towards the end, we really do want them to be able to face situations that they've been avoiding, be able to engage in anxiety, provoking situations like, speaking in front of a crowd or something like that. In this earlier instance, we use that example of, a youth who witnessed their friend being jumped at the basketball courts. And so in this example, we'd have them be able to identify that, yeah, they're avoiding the basketball court, but they want to be able to go back there again. And so we would help them develop kind of a plan to be able to start to do this again. So we'd start with, a less anxious, provoking situation, and really gradually, be able to build this up. And of course, in connection with their caregiver, we want people to know what they're doing to be a backup support while they really fully carry out these plans. But really thinking, we do want them to be safe as they're, going through this process. So we do want it to be a safe plan, and that's the caution around this. But this is the facilitator's job, is to help youth be able to develop these plans in a safe way. And then, again, we want to be able to have them think about how thoughts influence actions. If we give them a scenario that, there's a friend doesn't talk to me at all, and that's unusual. Normally this friend would stop and talk to me, or we'd have some interaction. But so we come in, what are all the thoughts that are going through our minds, and what are kind of actions result from some of these thoughts that we may have, and how that could influence what we think and do in those situations. And then we have them, rate the pros and cons of the various solutions. We could talk to her again and ask why she's angry, or what's going on. Really think through the pros and cons. We would confront her in an aggressive manner. What would be the pros and cons of that? What would happen if we just stayed away from her for a while? What would be the pros and cons of that? And really helping them see all of these different scenarios are really helping them see that they do have an influence on their outcomes. Because a lot of youth feel like life just happens to them, and they don't understand and have hope that they do have some influence on how some of the outcomes that can happen from different situations. And so it helps instill their ability to have a little bit more control with their life and what they do in response to different situations, and what they would, want to do to promote some positive consequences for themselves in various situations. And again, we help them identify their circle of trust and be able to identify people who are surrounding them, and be able to have a visual representation of their circle of support. And this may bring up, if their circle is small, right? what are some unhelpful thoughts about other people and how that influences us to have a less of a circle or a more fuller circle, and um, how trauma even impacts that for us. And then there's the development of resource cards along with the circle of trust, really being able to who can support them um, in school in various different settings in the community, outside of school, on the weekends, in the evenings, who are people that are around and um, can be called upon. And one of the things that we do as a part of the curricula is, we do want to um, really have youth be able to reflect on their experience before they went through the curriculum and after, and be able to see their own progress, their own knowledge that they've learned and skills that they've gained, and to be able to just, celebrate that they were able to identify a lot of different coping skills and that they've learned some things that are helpful to them. And so I know we're going to be opening it up for question and answer here with the remainder of our time. We do want you to be aware that if you are interested in implementing this, to email Deborah and Amy, to attend a training. I understand, Amy, that there's a training scheduled later this year. Can you
Yeah,
talk a little about
we
that?
are working on setting up a training in October 7th and 8th. It would be a multi-site training, so asking people to come together in Missoula, Montana. And it's basically a 7-ish hour training that we would do in 2 parts, so 2 half days. And so if you're interested in that, please email us. The emails, I put them in the chat and they are also on the last slide that's coming up. Um, but please email us of your interest, and it will be offered in person. There was a question earlier about being able to participate virtually, and so that's a possibility to we could potentially set up a hybrid where some people are there in person and some people join uh, online. So we'll see about that. So just share, email us of your interest, and then I do see an email being shared. I can copy that to our list of interested participants.
Yeah. And after we do trainings, we do set up consultation calls for people who, as they're implementing, if something comes up while you're facilitating their curriculum, to be able to share and be able to have support through this process. And I think one of the powerful things about this curricula is that it is a universal curricula. It is, anyone can implement this in any setting. I know we talked a lot about a school setting. It doesn't necessarily have to be a school setting to be able to utilize this. This could be in any setting. It is helpful for all kids to learn a lot of these basic concepts and have this as a foundation, right? When to be able to have these skills and have this knowledge. So I think that's the powerful thing, that you don't need a mental health background to be able to do this. It can be, a lot of different people in your community who is interested, who's familiar with, being able to do um, little lessons like this or talking in front of kids, and, kind of having that role already potentially. But, those, there's a lot of people within various communities, I would think, that could implement something like this in your setting. So we'll open it up now for any questions.
And I see another question in the Q&A, asking if there's a cost for the curriculum, and if your organization, or if you or your organization serves children American Indian Alaska Native children are our center under our current funding. We're able to provide the training at no cost, as well as share the curriculum, which we would share with you electronically for you to then print out. So that's a factor is um, potentially some printing costs for you, but we would share the actual curriculum electronically as well as the training.
Mhm. And if you were wanting to attend in person a training and it wasn't at your location, you may need to have travel costs to attend the training in person, but as Amy said, the one coming up will be hybrid, so there wouldn't be any cost if you attended virtually.
And it looks like Antonio um, is ready to share the evaluation so y'all can do it while we're still online together. So that feel free to do that, Antonia. Thank you, Alicia and Sonia, for sharing your emails. I'll add those.
Are there any other questions? Mhm.
I'm curious if folks just have sort of initial um, comments or reactions to this curriculum. Does it feel like something the youth that you work with could benefit from? Does it seem like relevant? Just curious to get a sense of what some folks are thinking, if you don't mind sharing. One other thing about this is when we teach this curriculum, we're also learning it ourselves. And I think that's helpful, especially if we do like team up on teaching it. We're also building and solidifying our understanding of trauma. And I think so kind of a parallel process. We can kind of learn how we and those that we work with handle our own trauma. Well, thank you, William Harris, for your email.
Melissa, thank you for sharing all this wonderful information. Sounds like a great curriculum. Excited to talk to my team about it. I serve Alaska Native youth that are just as involved through our youth healing to wellness court, and I think this could be a great addition to our program. Certainly.
Great.
Yeah. And great feedback, right, from the schools that have implemented it, and some of the after school programs, certainly.
Yeah, I think that um, what we commonly hear is that, yeah, maybe we've done some of these, utilized some of these concepts, but we have never had something that's has a scope and a sequence and it's well organized and easy to just pick up and sort of roll through the lesson plan. So I think it's been helpful that way to have something already created where you don't have to go out and look for sort of piecemeal all of these different strategies together on your own.
Great, I'll put this here. Again, some emails. I know you posted that in the chat, Amy. Our emails.
Yeah, having trouble capturing the emails that are coming in. But I know we can access emails afterwards too. Those that signed up and attended, we can get their email. So I'm writing down your name.
Great. Well, thank you for attending. We know it's, you could have been doing a lot of things this afternoon. You chose to spend your time with us. So we're excited to introduce you to the STAR curriculum, and yeah, thank you for joining us.
Oh, and thanks for your added comment, Jenny, about the caseworker um, clinicians are swamped, so this is another option for helping youth through trauma. That's great. Thanks, Paula.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing.
A couple other questions.
Oh, are there a couple questions?
What should I do to be part of the training? I live in the Gambia. Um, I think that would be a matter of setting up something virtually and just getting the timing right. And if we needed to record it, because it would be an unreasonable time for you, that's an option too. So yeah, maybe I can follow up with an email and we can work through that with you. Thanks for asking. And yeah, we can provide a certificate of attendance. And if you're serving American Indian or Alaska Native youth, there will not be a cost for the training at this time because our grants support that work. So that there's no cost for the curriculum other than printing and no cost for the training unless you're traveling to us. Thank you, Sonia.
So
Oh, Cincinnati. Okay. Yeah. And the other curriculum that we have utilized or developed is the Bounce Back for Classrooms. It's for younger children. And we developed it with our Native youth in mind. But we have some folks over in Baltimore who have adapted it somewhat to fit their population of youth that they're supporting. So we've been learning about other ways of adapting these curriculum and happy to share ideas for how you might be able to adapt to your own setting. All right, and a school counselor, that's great.
great. Thanks for joining us over the summer.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, the folks in Maryland. Yeah, so William Harris, yeah, they're really excited about what they've done. They're actually using mental health professionals that they have a grant that they've hired that go into the schools and they facilitate the curriculum that way. And they try to have teachers present, so it's not just the clinicians that are doing it, but everyone's sort of building that knowledge together and they can reinforce the concepts. I will make a note of that, William. And thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate that. And for your comments and questions. And we look forward to connecting with you after for those of you who are interested in some training.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.